Zeus, the king of the gods, sat on his seat on Mount Olympus, looking down on the troubled continent of Greece. It was ravaged by conflict, and wild monsters roamed the country. Zeus noticed what needed to be done. A hero had to rise, a hero to be fathered, who could unify the people and rid the planet of these dreadful monsters. This hero was to be Heracles, also known as Hercules by the Romans. Zeus then chose the beautiful Alcmene to be Heracles' mother because she was a descendant of Perseus, the great hero. While her husband was at war, Zeus impregnated Alcmene, intending to create his son the next great ruler of Greece. He was unaware that his wife Hera, the queen of the gods, had been watching these events unfold. She had previously sat idle while Zeus fathered numerous illicit children, but this time she had had enough. When Zeus pledged an oath to grant kingship to the next descendant of Perseus, believing it to be his son Heracles, Hera saw an opportunity to exact revenge on her husband. When Heracles was about to be born, she employed her magic to delay his delivery while also speeding the birth of another descendant of Perseus, a child named Eurystheus. Eurystheus, who was born just seconds before Heracles, became Perseus' next descendant, forcing Zeus to give him the throne instead. While Zeus couldn't do anything about his son's lost kingdom, he was able to exact his own revenge on Hera. After Heracles was born, Zeus took him to Hera's bedchamber on Olympus. While Hera was sleeping, Zeus placed the newborn on her breast, allowing Heracles to feed on the goddess's milk and take some of her heavenly might for himself. Hera was startled and tossed the baby from her chest, splashing milk throughout the heavens. This milk would settle in space, becoming known as the Milky Way. Zeus chuckled to himself and returned Heracles to Earth, putting him in a cot next to his mother. Hera was outraged upon her return to Olympus. This was too embarrassing for her to ignore. So, in an attempt to kill Heracles, she sent 2 snakes into his cot. To her surprise, Heracles simply smiled and grabbed a snake in each hand, strangling them with the strength he had taken from her. Hera gazed down at the scene, furious, vowing to make Heracles' life as unpleasant as possible. Heracles grew up learning from some of Greece's most renowned experts in everything from archery to music. Heracles had an extremely short temper, which became apparent at a young age. This, paired with his incredible power, made him a threat to both his friends and rivals. Linus, his music teacher, discovered this the hard way. Heracles was unable to play the lyre with grace, and became enraged by the frequent corrections while instructing the young hero to play it. Following some particularly harsh comments, he smashed Linus in the back of the head with the instrument, killing him instantaneously. While Heracles only suffered a modest punishment, his temper caused him severe problems later in life. His foster father, Amphitryon, the leading commander of Thebes, was killed in a brutal war with the neighboring Minyans, giving the young hero his first taste of fighting. After his foster father died, Heracles assumed command of the Theban army and led it against the Minyans. Along the way, Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, came before him, having been dispatched by Zeus to assist the young hero. She brought presents from the gods, including sparkling swords and armor from Olympus's forge. Heracles thanked the goddess and raced into combat, using Athena's talents to avenge his foster father and defeat the Minyan forces. When Heracles returned to Thebes, he was hailed by the grateful Theban monarch, who gave the hero his daughter Megara in marriage. Heracles and Megara had many happy years in Thebes, raising 3 children and being respected by the entire town for Heracles' role in safeguarding the city. Heracles became enraged and swung out at the monsters, killing one instantaneously. The other monsters panicked and fled, but Heracles, now enraged, would not let them go. He tracked them down and killed them with his bare hands. Only then did Hera disperse her magic, removing the illusion from Heracles' sight. The hero looked in horror as the monsters reverted to their original form. His own family lay dead before him. He furiously shook their bodies, hoping to wake them up, tears streaming down his cheeks. Unfortunately, it was too late. Hera's magic had worked, and he would be haunted for the rest of his life by the guilt of murdering his own wife and children. As Heracles glanced down at his blood-stained hands, he realized he needed to atone for his crimes. The murder of a family member was regarded as one of the most heinous crimes in ancient Greece. If Heracles did not atone, the Furies, monstrous beings from the Underworld, would hunt and punish him indefinitely. The only person he knew who could give him advice was the renowned Oracle of Delphi. So he exiled himself from his home in Thebes and began his quest for redemption. The Oracle of Delphi served as Apollo's mouthpiece, delivering prophecies and divine direction. This time, however, Hera was able to utilize her power to influence some of the oracle's statements. When he prophesied what he should do to atone for his violations, the oracle told him that he had to serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae for 10 years. Eurystheus was a descendant of Perseus who had been born just seconds before Heracles. Just as Heracles was ready to begin his journey, the oracle interrupted him, declaring that if he finished his service, his father, Zeus, would make him immortal. Heracles bowed to the oracle, rose up, and headed to Mycenae. Labor 1, the Nemean Lion. King Eurystheus had been aware of Heracles for some time and was immensely jealous of him. The two were cousins since they both descended from Perseus. However, they were not the same. Heracles was powerful and courageous, whereas Eurystheus was cowardly and weak, sometimes sending others to fight his battles for him. Heracles, now in servitude, bowed before his cousin Eurystheus, who could not control his excitement. The monarch quickly accepted Heracles' slavery and assigned him to perform 10 labors over the course of 10 years. These tasks, however, would have to be accomplished without support or compensation. Heracles lowered his head in shame, wondering what his first labor would be. King Eurystheus informed him of a fierce lion that had been ravaging Nemea, a town in the northeast of his kingdom. The lion could not be stopped. Its golden pelt was resistant to weapons, and its claws were sharper than any sword known to man. It had murdered all those sent against it, and Heracles was now tasked with killing the beast. Knowing that no sword or spear could penetrate the lion's hide, Heracles trained for months, uprooting trees and lifting rocks to build his strength. He was stronger than ever and could now tackle the beast with his own fists. Heracles then showed the lion respect by bending his head, hoping that he had not inflicted any extra suffering. Realizing that the lion's fur would help him in his impending tasks, he extracted one of its razor-sharp claws and used it to skin the animal. He then slung the fur around his shoulders like a robe, wearing the lion's head as a protective hood. As Heracles left the lair, he passed the armor that Athena had given him, leaving it on the floor as a reminder of his previous life. He then discovered a massive oak tree, which he raised off the ground and stripped of its limbs, transforming it into a club. This would be his new sword, and the lion's skin his new armor, both emblems of his journey to salvation. Eurystheus was taken aback when Heracles came to Mycenae draped in the skin of the Nemean Lion, never expecting him to survive. Labor 2, the Lernaean Hydra. Heracles' second labor was to kill the Lernaean Hydra, so he went to Lake Lerna, near Argos, where the terrifying water serpent lived. The Hydra possessed 9 heads, one of which was immortal. Its blood was the most toxic material known to mankind. Hera wanted to make the creature's challenge tougher throughout his quest to confront it. She buried a massive crab deep in the lake to attack Heracles during the battle. When Heracles arrived, full of confidence from his victory against the Nemean Lion, he ran toward the Hydra, with his club in hand. He completely removed one of the Hydra's heads with a huge swipe. To his horror, 2 new heads appeared where one had previously existed. Confused, Heracles continued to hack off more heads, but this just worsened the situation. Each time one head was eliminated, 2 more would appear. To make matters worse, Hera's gigantic crab rushed out of the ocean and pinned Heracles to the ground. With the 2 creatures attacking him, Heracles knew his doom was close. But as the Hydra approached, an arrow shot from the bushes and wounded it in the side. Heracles turned around to find his nephew Iolaus aiming a bow at the monster. The child had accompanied his uncle to the lake, wanting to assist in any way he could. With the creatures distracted, Heracles rushed for his club, swinging it so hard that he crushed the enormous crab in one hit. Moving out of harm's way, Iolaus planned a strategy to kill the Hydra. While Heracles hacked off a head, Iolaus would cauterize the Hydra's neck with a flaming torch, preventing new heads from growing. The 2 worked together for hours, slashing and cauterizing until only the eternal head remained. Heracles then removed the immortal head and hid it behind a huge stone alongside the lake while it continued to hiss. He then knelt near the Hydra's body, immersing the tips of his arrows in the deadly blood. The tiniest touch from one of these arrows would be fatal, something that would help him in his future labors. Despite destroying the Hydra, Eurystheus did not credit Heracles' effort, as he was assisted by his nephew Iolaus. As a result, Heracles would have to perform additional labor, which he was unaware of at the time. As Heracles and Iolaus left the lake to thank the crab for its help, Hera seized the remains and projected its image into the heavens, making the constellation Cancer. Labor 3, the Ceryneian Hind. Heracles' third labor was to catch the Ceryneian Hind and return it alive to Eurystheus. The hind was a lovely creature, similar to a stag, with bronze hooves and stunning golden antlers. Eurystheus chose the hind because it was not only exceedingly swift, making it nearly impossible to catch, but it was also devoted to the goddess Artemis, who employed the creatures to drive her chariot. Eurystheus believed that even if Heracles caught the hind, the goddess would kill him. Heracles was no match for an Olympian. Heracles then went to Mount Cerynea, where he chased the hind for a year before finally capturing it. Not intending to injure the animal, Heracles discharged an arrow toward it, scaring it into the sea. This slowed the hind down just enough for him to grab it, bind its legs, and toss it over his shoulder. Hercules then returned to Mycenae, but as soon as he went outside of Mount Cerynea with the hind, the goddess Artemis descended from Olympus, pointing her bow at the hero's chest and accusing him of attempting to kill the animal. Heracles dropped to one knee, hastily stating that the blame was on King Eurystheus. Her twin brother Apollo then emerged and attempted to alleviate the tension. He said that Eurystheus was under Hera's command, and that Hera resented them both, as they were, just like Heracles, illegitimate children of Zeus. Artemis, who enjoyed assisting Hera's opponent, allowed Heracles to pass on the condition that he release the hind after his labor was completed. Heracles thanked the goddess and returned to Eurystheus, who was stunned to see his cousin return successfully for the third time. After releasing the hind into the wild as ordered, Heracles requested his cousin's fourth labor. Labor 4, the Erymanthian Boar. For his fourth labor, Eurystheus ordered Heracles to mount Erymanthus to capture a gigantic boar that had been terrorizing the area. Not thinking much of the task, Heracles set off with enthusiasm, even deciding to visit his friend, the centaur Pholus, along the way. Centaurs were half human, half horse creatures known for behaving more like beasts than people. Pholus was an exception, as he was both nice and intelligent, and had known Heracles since childhood. After Heracles arrived, Pholus decided to give a dinner party in honor of his guest, inviting a few of the local centaurs, including Heracles' old, intelligent and immortal archery teacher Chiron. As the feast began, everything was going nicely. They ate roast meat, and Heracles reminisced with his old teacher before going on a walk. On his way out, he came upon a jar of wine on Pholus' shelf, which he chose to open and consume in large proportions. He had no idea that the wine was shared by all of the centaurs. Some believe it was given to them by the deity Dionysus decades earlier. The wine had a strong odor that the centaurs could detect for kilometers around. When Heracles returned, he was confronted by a large gathering of centaurs, who demanded to know why he had consumed their wine. The situation quickly became out of control when friends Pholus and Chiron attempted to calm the other centaurs. This was because the entire tribe had come because of the wine's aroma. The centaurs were furious and attempted to murder Heracles, but they couldn't compete with him, no matter how many they had. Heracles defended himself by firing them with his arrows, which were smeared with the toxic blood of the Hydra. Many of them were killed, while the others fled. Unfortunately, Heracles had unintentionally shot his teacher Chiron during the confusion, causing him to collapse in anguish and cry. The wound did not kill him since he was immortal, but he would suffer for all eternity with the poison of the Hydra running through his veins. Zeus, on the other hand, had witnessed the events and decided to save the elderly centaur by capturing Chiron's spirit and sending it into the heavens, resulting in the constellation Sagittarius. Pholus picked up one of the centaurs from the ground, perplexed as to how such a small shot could have killed so many. As he raised it to his face to get a better look, the arrow fell from his hand and landed on his foot, killing him instantly. Heracles returned after chasing the other centaurs away, but when he realized he had killed both his buddy and his teacher, he was stricken with regret and sorrow. Heracles buried Pholus' body, paid his homage, and then continued on his quest to capture the Erymanthian boar. Unknown to Heracles, a centaur named Nessus had escaped the massacre and fled far into the mountains, where he would spend more than a decade plotting his revenge. Heracles fulfilled his actual task with ease, chasing the boar into deep snow and binding it in chains before returning it to Eurystheus. Eurystheus was terrified when he saw the gigantic monster. He jumped into a large storage jar and refused to come out until Heracles, removed the boar from the room. Heracles could barely conceal his enjoyment, but he did as instructed and set the boar free. King Eurystheus then slid out of the jar, embarrassed, and quickly sent Heracles on his fifth labor. Labor 5. The Augean Stables. Heracles' fifth labor required him to clean the Augean stables in a single day with only his hands and without any assistance. Eurystheus believed the mission was impossible and sent Heracles on his way, convinced that defeat was certain. The stables belonged to King Augeas of the neighboring kingdom of Elis. They held 3,000 immortal animals that had not been cleansed in 30 years. The stables were overflowing with animal manure, which had piled several meters high in some areas, and no one dared to approach them because of the foul odor. The waste had also flooded into surrounding meadows, rendering them unsuitable for crop cultivation. When Heracles arrived in Elis, he was met by a crowd of joyful citizens. People looked to him as a hero, as word spread about his efforts, and the creatures that had afflicted several communities were no longer present. When he disclosed that he had come to accomplish his fifth labor, the people encouraged him to go to King Augeas and seek a reward. Heracles was persuaded and went to see the monarch, who was pleased to grant the hero 1/10 of his immortal herd if he completed the assignment before midnight. King Augeas instructed his eldest son, Phyleus, to keep an eye on Heracles, believing he would fail. As he approached the stables, Heracles was hit with a foul odor. It was far bigger and filthier than he had expected, stretching the length of a small metropolis. After looking around, Heracles concluded that the mission was difficult to fulfill. He instead went to the nearby rivers Alpheus and Peneus, hoping they would do the job for him. Heracles used only his bare hands to dig a canal from the rivers down into the stables, following the restrictions that Eurystheus had imposed. Once finished, a stream of water poured into the stables, sweeping away years of grime in an instant. The river continued to pour onto the neighboring farms, enriching the crops with massive quantities of manure. This sparked joy in Elis, with the people shouting for Heracles since their farms would grow for years to come. When King Augeas discovered what Heracles had done, he was furious. He had only consented to grant Heracles a reward because he believed the task was impossible. While Heracles had officially followed the rules by using just his bare hands, Augeas refused to admit that he had accomplished the assignment correctly and refused to pay him. Heracles proposed that the dispute be decided by leading inhabitants of Elis, many of whom had watched the labor. As the trial began, Augeas' son Phyleus testified that Heracles had fulfilled his end of the deal. Outraged, King Augeas stood up during the trial and exiled Heracles and Phyleus from Elis. He felt Heracles had cheated because the assignment had been performed by the river gods rather than Heracles himself. To make matters worse, and unknown to Heracles at the time, Eurystheus refused to accept this labor as one of the 10, claiming that the duty had been completed in exchange for a share of the immortal herd. Heracles began his journey back to Mycenae in order to accept his next labor from King Eurystheus. While he could do nothing for the time being, he would return after his labors were over to exact revenge on King Augeas, whom he would slay before crowning the king's son Phyleus as the new king of Elis. Heracles would mark this anniversary by establishing the legendary Olympic Games, which would take place every 4 years at Elis. Labor 6. The Stymphalian Birds. Heracles' sixth labor was to drive away a group of man-eating birds from Lake Stymphalus. These birds were sacred to Ares, and their iron beaks could pierce even the hardest armor. When Heracles got to the lake, he discovered that it would be more difficult to detect the birds in the deep, muddy marshlands surrounding the lake than to kill them. Even if he could discover and kill some every day, it would take him more than a year to find them all. Time he simply did not have if he was to perform all of his labors in 10 years. Fortunately for Heracles, Zeus, his father, had been watching him from above. Zeus asked the other gods to help Heracles when they could, but he refrained from interfering directly out of concern that this would further anger Hera. In this case, Athena spotted a chance to assist her half-brother while watching over Heracles. Heracles was examining the surroundings when he heard metal clashing behind him. He watched a godlike figure vanish into the thick forest as he turned around. A set of bronze rattles, of a quality that could only have been produced on Olympus, rested on the fallen trunk of an ancient willow tree when he got close. Heracles took the rattles to a neighboring hill that overlooked the marsh, grateful to whatever gods had helped him. While the rattles did not seem like much to the hero, as he began to shake them, the noise they made caused the birds great agony, with hundreds of them rising from the water and calling out in terror. As the birds soared into the sky, they formed a large flock at which Heracles took aim. He took his bow and used the arrows steeped in the Hydra's blood to kill the birds instantaneously. Those who survived escaped the lake with Heracles' work finished. Labor 7. The Cretan Bull. When King Eurystheus watched his cousin return successfully yet again, he realized he had completed all of the hardest jobs in his kingdom. Needing more time, he sent Heracles to Crete, a Greek island near the mainland, where King Minos would assign him his next task. King Minos had received a lovely white bull from the sea god Poseidon, with an expectation that he would sacrifice it in Poseidon's honor. Instead, King Minos chose to keep the bull for himself, believing it was too lovely to kill. In revenge, Poseidon caused the king's wife to fall in love with the bull, which resulted in the birth of the Minotaur, a wife tots. The king Minos confined in a labyrinth beneath his palace. After the bull impregnated the king's wife, Poseidon turned it insane, and the bull ran over Crete, destroying everything in its path. While Heracles was not meant to kill the Minotaur beneath the palace, that mission was reserved for the hero Theseus, King Minos did want Heracles to catch the mad bull that was wreaking havoc in his land. Heracles felt confident in his ability to defeat the bull because he had previously wrestled with the Nemean Lion. When he discovered the big thing, it lunged toward him. He was able to skillfully seize the horns and wrestle it to the ground. The two struggled for hours until the tired beast surrendered to Heracles. Because the bull was a child of Poseidon, it could walk on water, so Heracles got on its back and rode it across the ocean to Mycenae. When Heracles arrived with the bull, Eurystheus was afraid to see another mythical monster in his palace. So he hid in a storage jar and refused to come out until Heracles had removed the beast. Heracles did not want to murder an animal sacred to Poseidon, so he unleashed the bull outside of the palace, where it rampaged over the Greek mainland until it was caught and killed by the hero Theseus. Labor 8. The Mares of Diomedes. Heracles' eighth labor was to deliver Eurystheus the mares of Diomedes, the Thracian king. These horses were dangerous beasts capable of breathing fire, and Diomedes fueled their hostility by feeding them the flesh of reckless guests and outsiders to his kingdom. As Heracles traveled to Thrace, he was accompanied by his companion and lover Abderus, Hermes' son. When they arrived, the couple went to Diomedes' palace, where they saw the fire-breathing horses. Heracles was tasked with collecting the mares, which were chained to the palace wall with cast iron chains and displayed for all to see, thrashing and frothing at the mouth. A bucket of human meat lay beside them, making Abderus uncomfortable and anxious to enter the palace. He chose to wait outside while Heracles entered the palace and began negotiating. Heracles then approached King Diomedes, a foul-smelling man with a nauseating odor. His eyes flashed around in lunacy, and blood caked under his fingernails. Human flesh left over from feeding the mares. While the monarch was revolting, Heracles managed to calm down enough to begin negotiations for the horses. Heracles heard a cry from outside shortly after the talk began. Rushing out to see what had occurred, he was horrified to witness the horses rip into the corpse of his young lover Abderus, who had ventured too close to them out of curiosity. Heracles, enraged, charged back into the palace, slaying the guards and grabbing Diomedes by the hair, taking him outside and punishing the monarch. Heracles threw Diomedes to the monsters, who started devouring their master. However, Diomedes' flesh was so nasty that the horses gave up eating him halfway through, eternally disgusted by the taste of human flesh. With the horses calm, Heracles grabbed their chains and returned them to Eurystheus. King Eurystheus was disappointed by the beast's passivity and kept them in his personal stable for his royal collection. Labor 9. The Girdle of Hippolyta. Heracles' ninth labor was to retrieve the Girdle of Hippolyta, a gold and leather belt that assured success in war. This duty, however, was assigned by monarch Eurystheus' daughter, Admete, rather than the monarch himself. Admete admired Heracles, but she had a greater admiration for the legendary Amazon queen Hippolyta. The Amazons were a race of warrior women who lived on the outer edges of the known world. They could battle better than any man, and they frequently raided local tribes to demonstrate their authority. Their captain was Queen Hippolyta, daughter of the war god Ares, who had acquired a magical girdle from her father that guaranteed she would never fall in combat, Admete wanted Heracles to collect the girdle because it belonged to her hero. So Heracles traveled forth east, with a small company of warriors in case he had to confront the Amazons. Heracles was taken aback by the Amazons' kindness upon his arrival, since they offered his soldiers food and shelter. This was far from the violent and nasty reaction he had anticipated. Hippolyta had a special interest in Heracles, since she had heard of his enormous expeditions and labors. She brought Heracles into her private apartment and questioned him about his legendary adventures. The two got along well, and Heracles was reluctant to take the girdle from her. He resolved to reveal the truth about his ninth labor and Admete's wish. To his amazement, Hippolyta was more than glad to give him the girdle, placing it in his hands as a token of friendship. Hera couldn't believe her eyes. The assignment was going so smoothly. Her jealousy for Heracles grew stronger with each labor he completed, so she determined to intervene to make this one even more difficult. Disguising herself as an Amazon, she entered the camp, wandering among the ladies and spreading seeds of distrust. She gradually convinced the entire tribe that Heracles had come to enslave them, with the ultimate goal of kidnapping Hippolyta and transporting her back to Greece. The Amazons were enraged. They mounted their horses and charged toward the men they'd led into their camp. Heracles heard the ruckus and dashed outside, where he discovered the Amazons killing his friends. He whirled around in wrath, convinced that Hippolyta had deceived him, keeping him away from his soldiers so they could be slain. Before the queen could explain, Heracles raised his club and killed her. Her girdle did not protect her because she had already given it to Heracles. Heracles then dashed outside, defeating any Amazon who challenged him. He was able to save a limited number of his colleagues, and the troop quickly departed camp, returning to Mycenae. When Heracles returned, he gave Admete the girdle, sparing her any details of how he got it. Eurystheus had grown tired of Heracles beating whatever assignment was thrown at him. Eurystheus planned to send him to the farthest place he could think of, the island of Erythea, so he wouldn't have to deal with his cousin for a while. Labor 10. The Cattle of Geryon. Heracles was sent to Erythea for his 10th labor, to seize the cattle of Geryon, a three-headed giant. As a result, Heracles embarked on the lengthy trek to the edge of the world, where he expected to perform his 10th and final labor. He headed southwest along the African coast. Heracles, unused to the continent's fierce and burning heat, quickly became angry with the sun. Halfway across the Libyan desert, he pulled out his bow and threatened to shoot the sun with one of his poisoned arrows if it kept torturing him. Distressed by this, the sun appeared in human form as the god Helios, begging Heracles not to shoot him. He vowed not to shine as brightly while Heracles was on his quest, and he offered to give the hero his large golden cup, which was shaped like a water lily and used by Helios to sail over the ocean at night. Accepting the god's gift allowed Heracles to sail fast and continue his quest in the enchanted cup. When he reached the entrance to the Atlantic Ocean, he chose to commemorate his epic expedition by erecting two pillars, one on the African side and the other on the European side. These would subsequently be known as the Pillars of Hercules, with Ceuta on the African side, and the Rock of Gibraltar on the European side. As Heracles kept going, he became stuck in turbulent waters and once again pulled out his arrows, this time frightening the huge titan Oceanus. Oceanus, fearful of the poisoned arrows, calmed the seas while Heracles continued his trek, eventually reaching the island of Erythea. Heracles was quick to see the herd of cattle he needed to steal, as well as Geryon, the huge three-headed owner. Before Heracles could combat the three-headed monster, he was met by the cattle's enormous herder. Eurytion, the son of Ares, and Orthus, the two-headed dog and Cerberus' brother, but such threats were insignificant to Heracles, who merely destroyed them both with his club. Heracles chose not to confront Geryon because he wanted to complete his final assignment as soon as possible. Instead, he struck the three-headed giant with a poisoned arrow, killing him in seconds. Heracles put the livestock into Helios' cup and began sailing home. When he arrived in Greece, Hera decided to intervene yet again. She dispatched a swarm of gadflies to disrupt the cattle with their painful stings, causing them to scatter, some of which fled into the Thracian mountains. Heracles chased the livestock but was unable to catch them all. When Heracles returned to Mycenae about a month later, he returned Helios' magic cup and brought what remained of the herd to Eurystheus, who opted to sacrifice them to Hera. Heracles breathed a sigh of relief. He was finished. 10 years and 10 labors later, he could finally walk away as a free man, cleansed of his past offenses. He had no idea that his most difficult work lay ahead of him, for Hera had visited Eurystheus the night before and reminded him of the original conditions of the labors. Heracles was to finish his tasks without assistance or reward. Heracles' second labor involved conquering the Lernaean Hydra with the assistance of his nephew Iolaus. And in his fifth labor, he took pay from King Augeas to clean the Augean stables, although he never received it. So, much to Heracles' disappointment, Eurystheus revealed that the hero still owed him 2 labors, refusing to pardon or release him until he finished a new total of 12. Not only that, but his next mission was going to be the most challenging yet. Labor 11, the Apples of the Hesperides. Heracles' 11th labor entailed trekking to the garden of the Hesperides, the daughters of the night, and gathering the golden apples that grew on a tree there, which conferred immortality to anybody who ate them. Not only was the garden's location unknown, but Hera had sent a 100-headed dragon named Ladon to defend the tree. Heracles began his search for the famous garden by visiting the Titan Prometheus, who he assumed would know where it was. Prometheus stole the god's fire and gave it to humanity near the beginning of creation, giving them warmth as well as the capacity to cook food and forge metal. As punishment, Zeus bound Prometheus to a big boulder on the side of a lofty mountain and sent an eagle to eat his liver every day for eternity. Because Prometheus was immortal, the liver would regenerate each night only to be gobbled by the eagle the next day. By the time Heracles discovered him, the cycle of retribution had been ongoing for centuries. Heracles took pity on Prometheus and broke his shackles, shooting the eagle down from the heavens. Prometheus, grateful for being set free, was delighted to share the garden's location with Heracles, but warned him that no mortal may take the golden apples from the tree. Instead, he suggested that Heracles seek help from the Titan Atlas, who survived. Heracles ignored Prometheus' counsel and was convinced he could select the apples himself. When he arrived, he climbed over a large wall that enclosed the garden and was challenged by Ladon, the 100-headed dragon. He fired at the dragon with one of his poisoned arrows, killing it quickly before approaching the apple tree. When he tried to take an apple, it vanished, his fingers sliding through where the apple had been. Prometheus had been telling the truth. Heracles needed the services of an immortal. He then went to find Atlas, which was not straightforward given the Titan's massive size. Atlas fought against the Olympians in the conflict between the gods and the Titans, but after being defeated, Zeus sentenced him to hold up the sky for eternity as punishment. Heracles approached the Titan, explaining his circumstances and offering to negotiate a bargain. He would momentarily hold up the sky, providing Atlas with a much-needed relief, in exchange for Atlas collecting the golden apples. Atlas, relieved to be rid of his burden, even for a little time, accepted the agreement and proceeded to fetch the apples, passing the weight of the heavens on Heracles' shoulders. Even though he had previously accomplished the unthinkable, Heracles strained to handle the enormous weight he now had to carry. As time passed, his muscles began to cramp and shake, and he wondered whether this was the effort that would eventually break him. As the sun began to drop, Atlas returned with a basket full of golden apples. Heracles thanked the Titan with a relieved grumble and moved to return the sky to him. Not wishing to give it back, Atlas promised to deliver the apples to Eurystheus himself, pledging to return and bear the weight of the sky once more. But Heracles would not be tricked. He thanked the Titan for his wonderful offer and volunteered to keep the sky for a little longer, but asked if Atlas might take it back for a bit, so he could put on his pelt to cushion his shoulders and head. Knowing the pelt would make a significant difference, Atlas placed the fruits on the ground and took the sky from Heracles. Heracles picked up the fruits and said his goodbyes to Atlas as soon as he was released. Atlas was infuriated, cursing the hero as he fled, his roars rattling the ground for miles around. Heracles returned to Eurystheus and handed over the mythical golden apples. Even Eurystheus seemed impressed, though he tried not to show it. Hera had informed him that he couldn't keep the apples since they belonged in the sacred garden, so he put them in Athena's temple overnight, and the goddess returned them to their proper location. Labor 12, the capture of Cerberus. Heracles' 12th and final labor was to capture Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guarded the Underworld's gates. As Heracles began his journey, the messenger god Hermes appeared in front of him. Knowing that Heracles would be unable to negotiate the dark and tortuous halls of the dead on his own, Hermes had come to assist his half-brother in his final mission. He told Heracles that he should get permission from Hades and Persephone, the Underworld's king and queen, before taking their dog, so as not to incur their anger. Heracles and Hermes proceeded to Hades' palace after thanking the god for his guidance. Heracles approached the king and queen, explaining that he had been tasked with gathering Cerberus as his final duty. Knowing that assisting Heracles would enrage Hera, who had always looked down on him, Hades allowed Cerberus to be taken under two conditions. First, Heracles must use no weapons to catch Cerberus, and second, Cerberus must be returned once his task was completed. Heracles agreed to the terms and set off to fight the beast. Heracles wrestled the dog for hours, much as he had with the Nemean Lion and the Cretan Bull. With his club in one hand and Cerberus in the other, he dragged the hound by its chains and returned to the living world. The ghost of Medusa appeared just before crossing back over the river Styx, then vanished into one of the underworld's countless passages. Heracles turned around in horror and drew his sword, but when he gazed around, he saw the soul of his old buddy Meleager. Meleager disclosed his recent death, and the two got into conversation. Heracles then proposed to marry Meleager's sister, Deianira, in remembrance of his death. Meleager returned to the souls of the dead, thanking the hero. Heracles then handed Cerberus to King Eurystheus, who once again decided to hide in his jar, which was now permanently installed next to his throne. The monarch pushed his head out the top of the jar and, while shaking in terror, agreed to release Heracles from his service, pardoning him for his previous crimes. The death of Heracles. When Heracles returned, he took some time to revel, indulging in the pleasures of freedom. He was now a well-known hero, attracting admirers wherever he went. He would embark on several more adventures, including accompanying the hero Jason and the Argonauts on their search for the Golden Fleece. Heracles soon determined to fulfill the promise he had made to Meleager's ghost during his dying labor, find his sister Deianira and marry her. As the newlywed couple made their way to their new house in Tiryns, they encountered a swift river that they had to cross. On the opposite bank, a centaur approached and volunteered to take Deianira across on his back. Heracles accepted the offer, but did not recognize the centaur as Nessus, the solitary survivor of Heracles' destruction of the centaur. Tribe on his route to his fourth labor, Nessus had been scheming his revenge against Heracles for over a decade, and now he saw the perfect moment to carry out his plan. As soon as Nessus reached the other side of the river, he threw Deianira to the ground and tried to violate her. Seeing this from the other bank, Heracles took out his bow and shot Nessus in the chest with a poisoned arrow, knocking the centaur to the ground in agony. Nessus apologized to Deianira and offered her a present in his dying moments. He said that his blood contained magical love characteristics and instructed Deianira to quietly gather it in a jar in case Heracles fell in love with another lady. As Nessus died, Deianira gathered his blood and kept it hidden in case she ever needed to win back Heracles. She had no idea that she had just set off the chain of events that would eventually lead to her husband's death. The couple lived peacefully in Tiryns for a while and had 6 children. However, after a few years, Heracles grew tired of his peaceful lifestyle and wanted some of the action of his youth. Seeking excitement, he left his family and traveled to the world of Oechalia, where his former archery tutor, Eurytus, ruled as king. Heracles fell in love with King Eurytus' daughter, Iole, within a few days of his arrival. King Eurytus was currently organizing an archery tournament to determine who would marry Iole, which Heracles decided to attend. However, when Heracles succeeded, Eurytus refused to hand over his daughter because he had heard how Heracles had slaughtered his first family and did not want to put Iole in similar danger. Heracles stormed out of the palace in anger, only to return later to capture Iole and other women from the city. He headed them back to his home, where his children and wife Deianira lived. Deianira was originally pleased to see her husband home, but she got concerned when he arrived with a bunch of enslaved women. The way he gazed at Iole in particular was disturbing, causing her to fear Heracles had been unfaithful. In her desperate attempt to reclaim Heracles, Deianira obtained the blood of the centaur Nessus, which she had been keeping, in the hopes that its love characteristics would help her. She spread the blood on a robe, which she then gave to Heracles and asked him to wear it to dinner that evening. When Heracles put on the robe later that evening, he realized something was wrong. Nessus' blood began to stick to his skin, resulting in a terrible burning feeling. Heracles screamed in agony and attempted to rip off the robe, tearing big portions of his flesh in the process. Nessus, the centaur, had planned it all along. He knew Heracles would shoot him with a poisoned arrow if he tried to attack Deianira. By forcing Deianira to collect his blood contaminated with Hydra poison, Nessus ensured that Heracles would die in the same agony that he had inflicted on the other centaurs. Heracles' suffering lasted hours, and when his wife Deianira realized what she had done, she committed suicide. Knowing his death was near, Heracles dashed about his courtyard, chopping apart trees to build a funeral pyre. Once assembled, the hero lay down on it and asked one of his companions to ignite it. As the fire scorched through his skin and his body was engulfed in flames, Heracles smiled, relieved to be free of the terrible pain. At this point, a large storm cloud formed surrounding the cremation pyre. In the cloud, Zeus sat and watched as his son's mortal body burned. The god then captured Heracles' spirit and took him to Olympus, where he changed him into an immortal.